Today's discussion is titled You Love Art, Progress Through Creativity. And in this 1-hour discussion, we'll focus on how community collaborations develop hotspots in cities for artists and creatives. We are so thrilled to have an amazing panel of renowned artists joining us today. Now I'm going to move on and introduce our amazing speakers. The first person is Hank Willis-Thomas. Hank is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work is included in numerous public collections, including at Crystal Bridges Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and Brooklyn Art Museum. Also joining us is native Arkansan, Kat Wilson. Hey, Kat. Kat's work is theatrical, participatory, and humanistic. She often involves collaborations with others, including, in many of her photography projects, the subjects of the photos themselves. Kat has also exhibited at Crystal Bridges in an exhibition titled Personal Space. She is a PBS representative for American Portrait, and her work has been featured in the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and Oxford American Journal. Kat works closely with her community in Northwest Arkansas to create beautiful works of art. And finally, I'd like to welcome Vince Kadlubec. Vince is a founder of Meow Wolf, an art collective that has transformed into an award-winning art and entertainment production company that specializes in immersive, open-world walkthrough experiences. Kadlubec has been a force of vision for the company, announcing new projects in Las Vegas, Denver, Washington, D.C., and Phoenix. I'd like to start there and ask all of you, and we'll start with Hank answering this question. What are the conditions that exist in the communities that you work with that made it possible for you to realize your individual and collective creative pursuits?
You know me well enough to not start off with me with the hard question. I think where I have more questions about that is, who do we call our community? I have lived almost entirely in urban centers, and in those urban centers, art is often seen as a central driver and attraction. And so the conditions that have supported my work are this belief that visual culture and creativity outside of the commercial landscape is necessary. Yeah, so I think the conditions are open minds, open hearts.
I think that's a great response. Kat, do you want to take it next?
I'm here in Northwest Arkansas, so my community's not as big as Brooklyn and New York and stuff. But I can only answer this from my perspective as an artist, and I'm always checking the temperature of my community. I always say my images are successful because of the performance of my sitter, and my sitters are my community, and my community tell me when they like a project and they tell me when they don't by their participation. So for example, on Habitats, my community told me they liked that project, and then my community told me they wanted to be in Habitats. When I was their waitress, they let me know. When I was at Farmers Market, they let me know they wanted to be in the project. My community changes. All of a sudden, they don't need me anymore. So I started letting them take their own photos. So I started doing this thing called selfie throws. So if I don't change with the community as the community's changing, I'm just gonna be wiped out. No more Kat.
I grew up in Santa Fe. Santa Fe is an incredible place. It's a multicultural place. It's a place that is indigenous land, and it's a melting pot, honestly, of Hispanic, white, native cultures here in Santa Fe, and also cultures of fringe. So it's always kind of had this little pocket. So I think Meow Wolf gets a lot from that, and I've gotten a lot from that like subversive outsider sort of perspective. To me, it's not even about emerging cities. It's about emerging thought processes. It's about emerging generations. And, every city is an emerging city because every city has emerging thought processes that are progressive, that are looking at the world from a new angle. And it's not about the location, it's about the people. It's about who you are and how you represent yourself to the world.
Thank you. That's really great. I'm going to start sharing my screen as we move into the pointed questions that I have for you all. Hank, I'm going to start with you. From my perspective, I see how brilliantly you foreground the personal as political. And so it feels like collaboration is super important. Art and activism is really important. And so I want to talk about two projects that you've done recently. So this first one we can see here is Unity, and it's a sculpture that was commissioned by the city, and I believe it's in Brooklyn right now. It was unveiled last year. And then the upcoming Wide Awakes collaboration. It seems like with all the other elements I mentioned, your practice is moving more and more into public space. And I was hoping you could speak to both of these projects and the shift from, or this inclusion of the public.
So yeah, the sculpture in front of us is Unity 2019. It was a sculpture 5 years in the making, my largest sculpture to date. It was commissioned by the Percent for Art program for the city of New York, and it's right at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. It has its roots in a photograph I saw of a Harlem Globetrotter spinning a ball on his finger in front of the Statue of Liberty. And I realized that for so many, especially African-American men, a route towards liberty was through sports, and as one of the first kind of level playing fields, so to speak, where they could express their creativity and innovation in a form that was impossible to deny. For this sculpture, removed basketball, but I did ask Joel Embiid, who is a center for the Philadelphia 76ers, also an African immigrant from Cameroon, to allow us to 3D scan his arm. And I wanted to make a piece that kind of was imbued with so many of those kind of things, whether it be like this, like the giant of the athlete, but also the ambition of an immigrant, and how we can come from various different places to be part of one broad and complex culture and community. One of the very exciting things for me was to see how this piece has become a rallying point for a lot of the intersectional protests that have been happening in New York, especially as we reconsider the role of monuments in our psyche and in our society. We talked about community. This is my community. My community are anyone who believes in themselves and believes in other people. When I say believe in yourself, it's about trusting the process, not the outcome. And I came upon about 10 years ago this image of an all-seeing eye of that I didn't really understand, and it said "Wide Awake, 1860." And as I looked further into it, I found out that there was a abolitionist movement called the Wide Awakes that really grew from 1860 of 6 people who chose to wear capes to protect political outliers who were challenging the status quo. And I have been really working with a broad range of people, one to reconsider and reimagine what a 21st century Wide Awake campaign would be about, whereas those Wide Awakes were about the emancipation of the body. Particularly, we feel it's necessary for there to be real revolution. There needs to be collective evolution, and so that connects to emancipation of the mind, body, spirit, and soul. And one of the many different things we've done was on Juneteenth, a parade through Harlem. But it's really just an amazing collaboration where it's just a bunch of creative people just being generous and saying, hey, let's build like together something that and let it keep building and let new people come in and make it their own, and it be about this collective awakening, because I think this moment has been a moment of awakening for all of us. And if we frame this moment as a great American awakening or great global awakening, after having to reflect on the value of every breath and every person we love during the height of the COVID quarantine moment, realizing how some people don't have the luxury of being able to breathe, even by the people who sworn to protect and serve them. It's like it's necessary for us to really move past this moment by letting go of our egos and letting go of our own trauma and baggage, and recognizing that we all have it, yet we also all have the capacity to be our own superheroes, and collectively we might be able to save the world.
Why not? Why not? So my next question, Kat, it's for you. So you became known for your Habitat series, which started in 2004, and you began photographing Arkansans in their homes surrounded by what they'd identify as the most important objects they own. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, you shifted gears. Can you talk to us a little bit about this gear shifting? So first start with the Habitat series and then talk to us about the quarantine habitats, which you've been doing during the pandemic.
So habitats are portraits of people in their homes or places of work, wherever. And they put out all this stuff that gives you more information about who they are, what they're into, what they wish they were. I use a triangle composition, so I know your eye is following that triangle. And I've been doing it since I was 25 years old. So quarantine happens. And it really kind of felt like the world was about to end. It did. And so, I kept thinking, I've got to entertain my people. I've got to think of something, a project or something to keep people occupied. I need to do habitats, but I'll let everybody do it themselves. I'd learned from Selfie Thrones that people are ready to do their own photos. They want to be part of art, right? I'll give them direction so they can make their own habitats. And my community is already pretty familiar with the habitats anyways. I wrote out just some directions, just simple directions. And boom, all of a sudden more people were doing it. And then a professor assigns it to their class. And then all of a sudden art teachers start assigning. I make a packet and I started sending it out to art teachers. And then all of a sudden everybody's doing them. And every day there's just more and more submissions. You choose your space. Then I wanted everybody to choose like 10 objects. And when you chose your objects, I didn't want you to just choose, your PlayStation necessarily. I wanted you to really think about what's your family going to think in 100 years when they look at at your quarantine habitat. That's going to tell your family a lot of stuff. Our composition is going to be a triangle. We want a consistency throughout the images, right? I want everybody to post stoic and proud. And bonus points if you dramatically lit it from a 45-degree angle. The thing I just want to say about quarantine habitats is all our people all over the country were dying alone. And that was so freaky. And my wife was pregnant and they were talking about like maybe she was going to have to give birth alone. I wasn't going to be allowed in the room or in the hospital at all. And all this alone. And I just felt like quarantine habitats made me feel not alone. And I hope to God that they made people that were participating and watching and following along feel like they weren't alone.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really great. The next question, of course, is for Vince. So Vince, it's a really broad question. So how did the idea for Meow Wolf come about? And then I'd also like to know what your collaborative process is like.
So Meow Wolf, we started in 2008 here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, kind of as a response to a lot of things in the world. It was like the end of the Bush era. It was right as Obama was running as a candidate. Santa Fe is a very art-centric place, but for some reason, like the artists that were born and raised there couldn't get into a gallery, couldn't get invited into an art space. So we were like, instead of waiting for somebody to invite us into their world, into their process, we're going to just start our own space. We're just going to start our own institution. We're going to start our own museum, quote unquote. That's how Meow Wolf started. It was like a DIY punk sort of art collective. We were all broke. We all worked restaurant jobs, hotel jobs. And then we would use the money that we saved up to pay rent on a space. We made work out of materials that we pulled from dumpsters. We continue to build more and more work. We continue to welcome more and more people into the Meow Wolf collective, into the community. That lasted for 7 years until 2015. So we really kept it going for quite some time. And we had gained some recognition locally. What sort of started off as a passion project in our 20s became sort of this obligation in our 30s. We were tired of writing grant applications and getting denied. There was just not enough money to sustain. We were about to dismantle the whole thing and just kind of move on with our lives. But I was like, no, let's just give it one more go at it. And let's do it as a for-profit process, which we had been inspired by a place in St. Louis called the City Museum. And the City Museum is this like amazing sculptural playground. And when we visited them, they showed us that they were a for-profit, and they showed us how profitable they were and how popular they were. And that was just like a light bulb going off in our heads. I was lucky enough to get to know George R. R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones. He lives here in Santa Fe, and he was an employer of mine. And I just pitched the idea to George. I said, dude, like, we're gonna turn this old bowling alley into a crazy sculptural, psychedelic fantasy world filled with secret passageways. And he loved it. And so he kind of jumped on. And once George was on board, I was able to go out and raise money and turn what was like this nonprofit art collective kind of clubhouse thing into a full-time salaried gig for hundreds of artists. We opened the doors to our first permanent exhibition in 2016. We knew that people would dig it. What we didn't realize is that, like, you know, soccer moms in Kansas would like bring their families across the Midwest to come to Santa Fe to see our crazy psychedelic art. We want to bring the creative process. We want to bring the unknown into people's lives in order to help spark the creative thought processes for the general population of our country and our world. If we're not experiencing unpredictable things, then we don't have the ability to have unpredictable thoughts.
I think that's a really great segue, just being mindful of time, to the final question that I have. How can cities and communities work with artists? And I'm going to see whoever wants to jump at that one. Vince, I think you might want to take that first.
I'll just say what cities need to do with artists is they need to invest a shit ton of money into the arts and into raising the voice of cultural expression, and in a sustained way, not in a one-off way, but in a sustained way, if they want their city to maintain its vibrancy. What you see time and time again is that the artist, the cultural voice, the real raw creative passion ends up creating a vibrancy in a city that is attractive, and then the gentrification occurs. And that is kind of the first stage of the gentrification. And then people come in and they're attracted to that vibrancy, but then they end up choking it out. They end up killing it. Cities need to recognize that vibrancy, that art, that artistry, that cultural expression is the beating heart of your city. It's where value is at. It's the gold mine. So invest in it.
Kat, since you're sitting on a gold mine, why don't you go next?
Let's see. I don't know. I've been hanging out with a lot of art teachers lately because of my projects online. I forgot how cool art teachers are. One of my favorite art teachers is Eve Smith, and she teaches her students that creativity can create compassion. And she uses this example, and it's Giovanni Valderez, you guys, in Dallas. And his neighborhood was being gentrified, and prices are going up. The Hispanic community wasn't able to afford their own community. So he started making these piñatas that he called sad houses. And he started putting in all the areas that have been gentrified. Now tell me that's not going to work better than we would go into a city council meeting and talking about it, you know, over a crowd that's daydreaming. I think that an artist showing you their protest in this way, it has more of an effect. All right, Hank, what you got?
Well, I'm in New York, so, you know, the ship has already sailed on creativity here. I also feel that when I go to alleged emerging cities, I feel the vibrancy that I once felt in New York, which is not possible when you have so many people not in collaboration, but in competition for scarce resources. A lot of what I'm doing with my collaborators with the Wide Awakes is that, like, you know, maybe there'll be money, maybe there won't. It doesn't matter, because ideas are also currency. I know it's up to us, Kat and Vince, to like make our point. That's the beauty of what Meow Wolf has done. It's like, oh wait, artists can just figure out how to do stuff without begging, you know, these corporations and foundations to like throw some crumbs. I'm excited that all of you guys are doing this work that makes me want to leave New York.
Hank, on that note, I have a few questions from the audience. I'm going to start with this one because it's a good piggyback. Someone has asked you, when and where would you create your dream sculpture?
I don't have a dream sculpture. My dream sculpture is my relationships. I think I'm not interested in any egotistical or any monument to my ego. I'm sure it will be terrible. What I love about working on projects in Burning Man. And I feel like Burning Man should be everywhere personally, not some random place in the desert every for 1 month, 1 week a year, is that it is this collaborative communal effort to realize something. And one of the struggles I really have with my current practice is that like I am one of like 50 people who worked on that Unity sculpture, and I get all the credit, which I'll take. I think it does disservice when we kind of we create heroes are supposedly better than us. So I would ask that person to figure out where their favorite ideal place to put up a sculpture is, and then go to Burning Man and try to do it, and then figure out what you really want.
Artists and creatives alike have literally designed and built the world we live in today. How do we work together to harness that creativity to build a better future for everyone, not just the privileged few?
Yeah, I love that question. It's all about equitability and equity. The problem is that the creative only sees value at the first instance of their creativity. And as that creative starts to move its way through the world, it gets transferred and it increases in value, but the artist or the creative doesn't play in that value exchange. And so what artists and creatives and innovators have to do is protect their equity, and corporations and cities and the infrastructure needs to provide equity to those creatives. It's like every great artist dies broke. That's the switch that needs to happen. It needs to happen from both ends. Artists need to demand it, own a piece of your art even when you sell it. And then on the reverse, corporations that play in the creative economy need to value the artwork and provide incentives and gain sharing and royalty so that artists can have passive income as those ideas gain value over time. So it's a big infrastructural shift that needs to occur.
How do you all think that events like COVID, I'm going to say the current pandemic, how will publics engage with art that is participatory in this current pandemic and afterwards? And then if there's some ways to bypass these obstacles. Kat, you're the perfect person to...
Yeah, hashtags, obviously. We're going to use all this new technology that sometimes we don't even know where to go. Like, for example, how sad every gig I had was canceled this summer for Selfie Thrones. And, there's a really theatrical part to it. Look, I got confetti, I pop, all this stuff. But what am I going to do? I can't go out. Public can't come. So I'm going to start doing Selfie Thrones with teachers. I'm coming up with packets and I'm going to have them assign it. And the kids are going to make Zoom meetings. They're going to have their Selfie Throne, which has a real theatrical part to it. And, you just got to do the workaround.
If you don't have art in your community, you should make it. And because usually it's the people who are asking the critical questions are the ones who have the answers. And I think the generosity of sharing your ideas and being vulnerable and facing potential failure and embarrassment, which all of us do every time we put up a work of art, will actually make the society better. I think we in the creative field are civic leaders, and we have not held our space because we have allowed non-creative people to literally design our society, and that's why it has never worked. Whereas the reality is the work is perpetual. It's hard, it's beautiful and rewarding. In order for me to actually do anything, I have to imagine it's possible. And if I can't imagine, anything that I've ever made before it gets made, then it actually can't exist.
I have one quick question that is for everyone, and then we have to kind of wrap up. Have any of you thought about a future where your minds are being tapped to help build better cities?
We've lived through a pandemic now with 9/11. I mean, we can name all the hot spots that happened throughout all of our lives. Me, Vince, Hank, you. What if we lived during an era of a compassionate community, a compassionate society? Wow, wouldn't that be neat? I believe it's possible. And if Hank can visualize these things, we can all visualize this as a collaborative.
How do we create a ripple effect of compassion? Can we create new currencies of compassion, currencies of generosity, currencies of healing and forgiveness? Like, how do we, and I think there's some ideas that will come from self-defined creatives that will kind of answer those questions.
And quarantine's a great time to restart. I forgave all the people I'm mad at. during quarantine. I'm not mad at anybody anymore.
And
Everybody
we
else
feel
can
that. So Vince, can you, so what does one of the most forward-thinking collectives do in a time when everyone's collectively thinking about the future?
Yeah, that's a funny question because honestly, like our entire team is focused on delivering these gigantic exhibitions in Vegas and Denver. The Meow Wolf collective side, you know, is very much like all that energy and all those resources are going towards these new exhibits in other cities. And so like the flexibility, the agility hasn't quite been there. You know, Black Actors Guild in Denver, for instance, like their programming through the quarantine has just been on point, amazing. And I look at them and just like, damn, they're at the root of it, you know? And right now, like we're just so focused on these gigantic things.
And on that note, I think it's a good time to wrap it up. So from Kat, most change happens first in the art world. By bringing your audience into your art, you create memorable moments through participation. From Hank, art is a tool for communication and connection and community. It's institutional in shaping our culture, and culture shapes our laws. From Vince, sparking imagination and teaching creativity should be the core to every human's educational diet. How to envision something and taking steps to make it is how we advance as a species. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's give our guest speakers some love and thank them for sharing with us. And please follow the You Love series on Eventbrite to take part in our upcoming events. We're dropping the link in the chat so you can register for their next event taking place on July 9th. So thank you guys.